The courtroom falls silent as 3-year-old Zara Johnson whispers something to the police dog that makes the seasoned K-9 handler drop his clipboard. Judge Wilson removes his glasses, stunned by what the officer reports hearing. The prosecutor immediately calls for a recess, while the defense attorney demands the child be removed from court. No one anticipated that this little girl, who barely speaks full sentences, would deliver testimony that would not only change the case, but expose a system that had already decided her words mattered less because of her skin color. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe children deserve to be heard regardless of their background, and subscribe to join our community that values truth and justice. Now let's discover how one little girl's whispers shattered a wall of injustice. Zara lives with her mother, Tiana Johnson, in a predominantly white suburb of Atlanta, where they moved for better opportunities 6 months ago. Tiana works as a nurse at the local hospital while studying for her advanced degree, often pulling double shifts to provide the best life possible for her daughter. Their small but well-kept home sits at the end of a cul-de-sac in Oakwood Heights, a neighborhood with manicured lawns and strict homeowners association rules. From the day they moved in, they noticed the curious glances and tight smiles from neighbors who seemed surprised by their presence. Their neighbor, Richard Caldwell, a respected police sergeant with 20 years on the force, initially appears friendly, welcoming them with a practiced smile and firm handshake. He mentions casually how quiet and orderly the neighborhood has always been, emphasizing these words while maintaining eye contact with Tiana. Within weeks, however, his demeanor changes. He begins making noise complaints about Zara playing in their fenced backyard during perfectly reasonable hours. He calls authorities about minor issues like Tiana's trash cans being left out an hour too long, or visitors parking briefly on the street. When other neighbors host loud barbecues or leave their garbage bins out overnight, Richard says nothing. The pattern becomes impossible to ignore. One evening, after returning from a particularly exhausting shift, Tiana finds a formal letter from the Homeowners Association citing various violations, all reported by an anonymous, concerned resident. Frustrated, she walks next door to speak with Richard, directly suspecting he's behind the complaints. The conversation starts civilly, but quickly deteriorates when Tiana politely asks if he has concerns he could address with her directly instead of filing reports. Richard's friendly facade cracks, revealing a cold stare as he informs her that some people just need to learn how things work around here. When Tiana stands her ground, explaining that they have broken no actual rules, tensions escalate rapidly. Richard steps closer, invading her personal space on her own property line, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper as he tells her, "People like you always think the rules don't apply." The conversation culminates with Richard physically pushing Tiana against their shared fence when she refuses to back down, his finger jabbing her shoulder as he hisses that she should know her place. Zara witnesses this entire exchange from the doorway, frozen in fear, as she watches her strong, composed mother being threatened. Tiana files a police report that evening, but the responding officers, all colleagues of Richard, dismiss her claims despite the visible bruising on her shoulder and back. One officer even suggests that misunderstandings happen all the time between neighbors, and that perhaps she misinterpreted the interaction. They leave without taking photos of her injuries or filing an official report. That night, Tiana finds Zara sitting silently in her room, clutching her favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear she calls Buddy. When Tiana attempts to discuss what happened, asking if Zara is okay, the little girl, who normally chatters enthusiastically about everything, simply stares at her mother with wide, frightened eyes. From that moment on, Zara stops speaking entirely, except in whispers to Buddy, as though the trauma of seeing her mother threatened has stolen her voice. Tiana tries everything to help her daughter, reading her favorite stories, playing their special games, even arranging playdates with children from her daycare. But Zara remains silent with everyone except her stuffed companion. At night, Tiana hears her daughter whispering her fears to Buddy. The bad man might hurt Mommy again. Concerned about Zara's selective mutism, Tiana takes her to child psychologist Dr. Eleanor Wright, a specialist recommended by the hospital where she works. Dr. Wright's office is filled with colorful toys and welcoming artwork designed to put children at ease. But Zara remains withdrawn, clutching Buddy to her chest and refusing to engage in play therapy. During their first 3 sessions, Dr. Wright tries various techniques to connect with Zara, drawing puppets, sand play, but the little girl responds only with slight nods or head shakes, never speaking a word. Frustrated but determined, Dr. passes Wright notes that Zara seems to communicate through Buddy, whispering to the teddy bear when she thinks no one is listening. In their 4th session, Dr. Wright makes a breakthrough decision, bringing her certified therapy dog, a gentle golden retriever named Bella, to the appointment. Something remarkable happens when Bella enters the room. Zara's eyes widen with interest, and she slowly reaches out to touch the dog's soft fur. After several minutes of quiet interaction, Dr. Wright leaves Bella with Zara while she pretends to make notes, and that's when she hears it. Zara's small voice whispering secrets to the dog, telling Bella about the scary man next door and how afraid she feels when he looks at them. This unexpected connection gives Tiana hope that her daughter might eventually recover her voice fully, and they schedule regular sessions with Dr. Wright and Bella. Meanwhile, back in their neighborhood, Richard escalates his harassment campaign against the Johnsons. What began as petty complaints transforms into something far more sinister. Their mailbox is damaged repeatedly, trash is scattered across their lawn overnight, and their car tires are mysteriously slashed, incidents that somehow never appear on the security cameras of nearby homes. Richard makes it a point to be outside whenever Tiana returns from her night shifts, standing in his driveway or walking his dog precisely when her car pulls up, forcing her to acknowledge him as she hurries inside. His presence becomes a looming threat, a constant reminder that they are unwelcome. When Tiana installs her own security cameras around their property, the footage mysteriously corrupts whenever Richard appears near their home, suggesting he knows exactly how to disable the system, using his police knowledge against them. The local police continue dismissing Tiana's reports of harassment and vandalism, suggesting she's overreacting and making unfounded accusations against a decorated officer. One desk sergeant even takes her aside, advising her to think carefully about making enemies on the force if she wants prompt responses to future emergencies. The message is clear. The blue wall of silence protects their own, and Tiana stands on the wrong side of that wall. At the hospital where she works, Tiana overhears nurses discussing Richard's wife, who works in hospital administration, and learns about other complaints against Richard from women of color in the neighborhood that were similarly dismissed. One nurse mentions how another black family moved out after just 3 months following a series of unfortunate incidents that were never investigated. Another describes how her Latina friend was pulled over repeatedly by Richard for routine checks until she too relocated. The pattern becomes undeniable. Richard Caldwell has appointed himself the unofficial gatekeeper of Oakwood Heights, and he uses his badge to ensure the neighborhood remains exactly as he believes it should be. Tiana considers moving, even begins researching apartments in other areas, but the financial reality stops her. They've invested everything in this home, and starting over would mean abandoning her advanced degree program and disrupting what little stability Zara has left. Instead, she begins documenting everything meticulously, taking photographs of each incident, recording dates and times of Richard's suspicious appearances, saving every dismissive email from police and the homeowners association. She knows that someday she'll need this evidence, though she prays that day never comes. At night, she finds herself jumping at every sound, checking windows and doors repeatedly, while Zara's nightmares increase in frequency. The little girl begins sleeping with not just Buddy, but all her stuffed animals arranged in a protective circle around her bed, a child's desperate attempt to create safety in a world suddenly filled with threats. During their therapy sessions, Dr. Wright notes Zara's increasing anxiety, how she constantly positions herself to see the door, how she flinches at loud noises. Through Bella, they learn that Zara is afraid the bad man will come inside their house, a fear that breaks Tiana's heart because she cannot honestly promise her daughter that it won't happen. One night, while Tiana works a mandatory overnight shift at the hospital, Their worst fears materialize in a terrifying reality. The babysitter, a college student from the neighborhood named Ashley, puts Zara to bed at 8 o'clock and settles in the living room to study. Around 11:30 she hears a noise at the back door, but dismisses it as the wind or neighborhood cats. 15 minutes later, the power cuts out, plunging the house into darkness. Ashley uses her phone flashlight to check the breaker box in the laundry room, finding nothing obviously wrong. As she returns to the living room, she notices the back door standing slightly ajar, certain she had locked it earlier. Before she can react, a figure in dark clothing pushes past her, knocking her against the wall hard enough to disorient her. By the time she regains her balance, the intruder has disappeared down the hallway toward the bedrooms. Ashley, terrified, but thinking quickly, locks herself in the bathroom and calls 911, whispering that someone has broken into the Johnson home and a child is in danger. While waiting for police, she texts Tiana at the hospital. Upstairs, Zara wakes to the sound of someone entering her bedroom. She immediately recognizes Richard Caldwell, despite the ski mask covering most of his face, his distinctive police academy ring catching the moonlight as he begins systematically destroying her room. He tears down her butterfly decorations, rips the heads off her dolls, and slashes her bedding, all while muttering about teaching lessons and knowing your place. Zara, frozen in terror, slides under her bed, clutching Buddy, watching as Richard spray paints a threatening message on her wall, "Leave or else." He doesn't notice her hiding place, too focused on his destruction. When he finally leaves, Zara remains hidden, too frightened to move, even when she hears Ashley calling her name. When Tiana receives Ashley's frantic text, she immediately leaves work, racing home with her heart pounding so hard she can barely breathe. She arrives just as two police cruisers pull up, but instead of rushing inside to protect her daughter, the officers detain her in her own front yard, questioning why she's running toward a potential crime scene. It takes precious minutes to convince them she's the homeowner, minutes during which anything could be happening to Zara. When they finally allow her inside, she finds Ashley sitting on the couch, being interviewed by Officer Jenkins, a colleague of Richard's, who seems more interested in why Ashley was studying so late than in finding the intruder. Tiana pushes past them, racing upstairs to find Zara's room destroyed and her daughter nowhere in sight. The moments before discovering Zara safely hidden under the bed are the longest of Tiana's life, filled with a terror no parent should ever experience. When responding, officers finally inspect the damage. They treat the scene with suspicious detachment. Officer Jenkins suggests that perhaps Tiana staged the break-in for insurance money, pointing out there's no sign of forced entry, despite the clearly jimmied back door. Another officer implies that perhaps one of Tiana's associates is responsible, using air quotes around the word as though she must have criminal connections. They question why she lives in this neighborhood at all, insinuating she doesn't belong. Only Officer James Parker, newer to the force, shows any real concern. He notices Zara hiding under her bed, clutching her stuffed animal, and approaches, gently speaking softly, and offering her a small plastic police badge from his pocket. While the other officers dismiss the threatening message as juvenile vandalism, Parker takes photographs and makes detailed notes. He's visibly disturbed by his colleagues' behavior, but remains silent when they suggest filing only a minor incident report rather than a breaking and entering with threats. After the police leave without taking fingerprints or collecting evidence, promising a follow-up that may take some time, Tiana sits in the ruins of her daughter's bedroom and makes a decision. She can no longer rely on a system designed to ignore her. She begins her own investigation, setting up a hidden camera system that backs up to cloud storage, installing new deadbolts on all doors and windows, and creating a detailed record of incidents. She reaches out to community organizations specializing in discrimination cases and connects with other residents who've experienced similar treatment. Most importantly, she arranges for Zara to stay with her sister in a neighboring town while she works night shifts, unwilling to risk another terrifying evening. But her precautions prove insufficient. 1 week after the break-in, Tiana returns home from an evening class to find Richard waiting in her driveway. He blocks her path to the front door, his stance aggressive as he accuses her of making trouble with her police reports. When she attempts to walk around him, he grabs her arm roughly, his fingers digging into her skin as he hisses that people who cause problems in his neighborhood regret it. Tiana pulls away, telling him firmly that she's recording the interaction on her phone and will report this assault. Something in Richard snaps at her defiance. His face contorts with rage as he snatches her phone, throws it to the ground, and physically attacks her, pushing her against her car and striking her repeatedly while screaming racial slurs. "You people think you can come here and ruin everything we've built," he shouts, his spittle hitting her face as she struggles to protect herself. "This isn't your neighborhood. It will never be your neighborhood." Unknown to both of them, Zara has returned early from her aunt's house and witnesses the entire attack from inside the car where her aunt parked momentarily to answer a phone call. The little girl watches in horrified silence as her mother is assaulted, her tiny hands pressed against the window, unable to help or even cry out. What should have been an ordinary evening becomes a pivotal moment of trauma that will haunt both mother and daughter for years to come, a moment that exposes the ugliest face of hatred hiding behind a badge, meant to protect. Do you think Tiana was right to stay and fight rather than move away from this dangerous situation? Comment number 1. If you believe standing up to racial intimidation is always the right choice, even at great personal risk. Comment number 2. If you think protecting her daughter should have been her primary concern, even if it meant letting Richard win. Has someone in authority ever abused their power against you or someone you know? Like this video if you believe the system too often protects the powerful rather than the vulnerable. Subscribe to hear more stories of courage in the face of injustice. Now let me ask you this. What would you do if the very system designed to protect you became the source of your greatest danger? Let's see how Tiana navigates this impossible situation as her story continues. Tiana suffers serious injuries, requiring hospitalization, including 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and extensive bruising across her face and torso. The emergency room doctor, an older white man with thin patience, seems skeptical of her account until a nurse recognizes Tiana as a colleague and intervenes, insisting on thorough documentation of her injuries. X-rays, photographs, and detailed medical reports create an undeniable record of the assault, though Tiana notices the doctor carefully avoiding any speculation about who might have caused these injuries, despite her clear statement that a police officer attacked her. When 2 officers arrive to take her statement, Tiana's heart sinks as she recognizes them as regular patrons of the same bar where Richard hosts police department poker nights. Officer Brennan and Officer Sullivan exchange glances when she names Richard as her attacker, their disbelief evident before she even finishes describing the incident. "That's a serious accusation against a decorated officer," Brennan says, his tone suggesting she's fabricating the entire story. "We'll need to conduct a thorough investigation before moving forward with any charges." Their questions focus more on her behavior prior to the attack than on Richard's actions, asking if she provoked him, if she had been drinking, why she was returning home so late, whether she had ongoing disagreements with other neighbors. As well, they take minimal notes and leave without providing a case number or any information about next steps. The official police report, which Tiana obtains only after multiple requests, describes the incident as a neighbor dispute, with conflicting accounts rather than an assault, despite her extensive injuries and her aunt's eyewitness statement. The investigating officers, all colleagues of Richard, systematically undermine her case at every turn. They delay interviewing potential witnesses until memories fade, lose the initial photographs taken at the scene, and question Tiana's credibility by bringing up a 7-year-old parking ticket as evidence of her disregard for the one thing: the law. When Tiana's aunt attempts to provide her statement about witnessing the attack, she's told repeatedly that officers are too busy to meet with her until the officially designated reporting period lapses. Hospital staff, particularly those who work closely with Richard's wife Linda, who serves as nursing administrator, treat Tiana with barely concealed hostility during her 3-day stay. Her pain medication arrives hours late. Her call button goes unanswered, and she overhears whispers about troublemakers and playing the race card when staff believe she's sleeping. One night, nurse, bolder than the others, leans close while checking Tiana's vitals and whispers, "Linda says you're making it all up for attention. Nobody believes you." Only a few colleagues, mostly other nurses of color, show any support, sneaking in during their breaks to check on her and bringing small comforts from home. The hospital administration suggests Tiana take extended leave while she recovers, claiming it's for her benefit, but making it clear her presence has become disruptive to workplace harmony. As Tiana struggles with her physical recovery, a new threat emerges. Social services becomes involved after an anonymous report claims she's unable to properly care for Zara due to her injuries. The social worker assigned to their case, a harried woman with an overwhelming caseload, conducts a perfunctory home visit where she focuses on the lingering damage from the break-in rather than Tiana's careful safety preparations. She questions Tiana's decision to return to the home where the attack occurred, suggesting it demonstrates poor judgment that puts Zara at risk. "Children need stability and safety," she says, writing rapidly in her notebook without making eye contact. "Your situation appears highly unstable." The social worker seems particularly concerned about Zara's continued silence, interpreting it as a developmental issue rather than a trauma response. When Tiana explains about the therapy sessions with Dr. Wright and the progress with the therapy dog, the social worker remains skeptical, noting that proper verbal development is essential, and suggesting that perhaps Zara needs a more structured environment until this situation resolves. The threat of losing her daughter hangs over Tiana like a storm cloud, adding unbearable stress to her already traumatic experience. Meanwhile, Richard continues his duties as if nothing has happened. He patrols the neighborhood openly, even driving slowly past Tiana's house when she returns from the hospital. The police department issues a brief statement, standing behind the exemplary service record of Sergeant Caldwell and noting that accusations are not evidence of wrongdoing. Richard's wife gives interviews to local news outlets, describing him as a dedicated family man being targeted by someone who doesn't appreciate his commitment to neighborhood safety. Officer James Parker, increasingly uncomfortable with the department's handling of the case and disturbed by the joking references to putting the Johnson woman in her place that he overhears in the locker room, makes a decision that could end his career. Using a burner phone purchased with cash, he anonymously contacts Andrea Morgan, an investigative journalist with the Atlanta Tribune known for her coverage of police misconduct. Without revealing his identity, he provides dates, case numbers, and names of other minority residents who filed complaints against Richard that were subsequently buried. Andrea begins investigating, discovering a pattern of similar incidents across multiple precincts, where officers protected their own at the expense of justice. She reaches out to Tiana, who initially hesitates to speak with the press fearing retaliation, but eventually agrees to an off-record conversation that confirms the pattern Parker described. Meanwhile, Zara's trauma deepens as she's interviewed by insensitive social workers who misinterpret her silence as defiance or developmental delay. During one particularly difficult session, a male evaluator raises his voice in frustration when Zara refuses to speak, causing her to hide under the table, clutching Buddy to her chest. Dr. Wright attempts to intervene, explaining that Zara's selective mutism is a clear trauma response that requires gentle handling, but her professional opinion is dismissed as enabling behavior. The system that should protect this vulnerable child instead treats her as a problem to be solved, her silence a defect, rather than a desperate attempt to process a world that has become terrifying and unpredictable. Tiana, fighting through her own physical pain and emotional trauma, begins to realize that the system isn't simply failing them, it's actively working against them, protecting Richard while punishing her for daring to seek justice. The institutions meant to serve and protect have revealed their true nature. They protect their own, regardless of right and wrong, and they view Tiana and Zara not as citizens deserving protection, but as threats to the established order. Troublemakers who refuse to accept their designated place. As Tiana lies awake at night, listening for any sound that might indicate Richard has returned to finish what he started, she wonders if there's anyone left who might still believe in justice, anyone with both the power and the courage to stand against the blue wall of silence that threatens to crush her and her daughter beneath its weight. Andrea Morgan's preliminary investigation into police misconduct catches the attention of District Attorney Vanessa Taylor, a formidable woman with political ambitions and a growing file of complaints against certain precincts. Taylor recognizes the pattern emerging from Andrea's research, not isolated incidents, but systematic discrimination protected by departmental loyalty. She calls a private meeting with Assistant District Attorney Marcus Thompson, a former public defender known for his meticulous case preparation and unwavering ethical standards. This Johnson case could be the thread that unravels the whole sweater, Taylor tells him, sliding a thick folder across her desk. I need someone who won't be intimidated by badges or threatened by blue solidarity. I need someone who sees justice as more than a convenient political slogan. Marcus reviews Tiana's case file with growing concern, noting the inconsistencies in police reports, the failure to collect evidence, and the blatant attempts to discredit the victim. Having grown up in a similar neighborhood where police presence meant harassment rather than protection, he recognizes the familiar pattern of systemic racism hiding behind procedural technicalities. He agrees to take the case but warns Taylor about the potential backlash. The department will close ranks completely, he says. They'll dig up dirt on everyone involved, you, me, the victim, even the child if they have to. Taylor merely nods, her expression resolute. Then we'd better make sure our case is airtight. Marcus faces internal resistance immediately. Clerks misplace his document requests, colleagues cancel meetings last minute, and courthouse security suddenly needs to thoroughly check his briefcase every morning. The police chief, Gregory Mills, a 28-year veteran with political connections throughout the county, publicly questions the DA office's unusual interest in unsubstantiated claims against exemplary officers. At a press conference ostensibly about a drug trafficking arrest, Chief Mills takes a moment to comment on certain individuals exploiting current social tensions to make unfounded accusations against officers with unblemished records. Without naming Tiana directly, he references people new to established communities who misinterpret standard police procedures as something sinister, effectively painting her as an opportunistic troublemaker. The message is clear. The department will defend Richard at all costs, even if it means destroying Tiana's reputation in the process. Meanwhile, Officer James Parker faces his own professional crisis. After 5 years of dreaming about becoming a canine handler, he's unexpectedly assigned a partner when the previous handler retires early. Max, a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois with exceptional training in both detection and apprehension, becomes Parker's new partner after just 2 weeks of handler training instead of the usual 8. Parker suspects the rushed assignment is meant to keep him busy and distracted from the Johnson case, but he forms an immediate bond with the intelligent, sensitive dog. Department policy requires new canine teams to participate in community outreach events, and Parker finds himself scheduled to visit Zara's daycare center as part of a safety awareness program. He recognizes this as either an incredible coincidence or more likely a test of his loyalty. Will he mention recognizing the Johnson girl to his superiors? Will he report back any useful information? During the presentation, Parker Prepel demonstrates Max's training to the delighted children, showing how the dog can find hidden objects and respond to commands in multiple languages. Most of the children approach eagerly to pet Max during the supervised interaction time, but Zara hangs back, watching intensely from behind her teacher's legs. As Parker prepares to leave, something unexpected happens. Zara suddenly approaches Max, reaching out tentatively to touch his fur. The room falls silent as the little girl, who hasn't spoken to humans in months, kneels beside the police dog and begins whispering into his ear while stroking his neck. Parker, pretending to adjust Max's harness, leans close enough to hear fragments of what she's saying, descriptions of the bad man with the ring, and when he hurt Mommy. The connection between child and dog is immediate and profound, as though Max represents safety in a world where humans have proven dangerous and unpredictable. This unexpected moment of connection gives Parker an idea. Risking his career, and possibly his freedom, he approaches Marcus Thompson after researching which coffee shop the ADA frequents each morning. Their conversation, conducted amid the noise of espresso machines and commuter chatter, changes the trajectory of the case. Parker reveals his identity as Andrea's anonymous source and describes Zara's reaction to Max. "I think the dog might be the key to getting her to communicate," he suggests, his voice barely above a whisper despite their carefully chosen location. "She trusts Max in a way she doesn't trust people anymore." Marcus, intrigued but cautious, researches cases where service animals have facilitated communication with traumatized witnesses, particularly children. He finds several precedents, mostly in family court, where judges allowed innovative approaches to gathering testimony from vulnerable children. Armed with these examples, and Dr. Wright's professional assessment of Zara's condition, he petitions Judge Lawrence Wilson to allow an unconventional interview with Zara, using the K-9 officer as an intermediary. Judge Wilson, a traditionalist with 30 years on the bench and a reputation for strict procedural adherence, surprises everyone by agreeing to review the proposal. "The law must sometimes adapt to serve its fundamental purpose," he states during the preliminary hearing. "If conventional methods fail to give voice to a victim, we must consider alternatives that preserve both justice and dignity." Richard's defense attorney, Benjamin Hayes, objects, vehemently arguing that such an approach lacks scientific validity and could produce unreliable testimony. "This is an emotional appeal designed to circumvent proper evidentiary standards," he argues, his voice dripping with contempt. "Next, we'll be allowing testimony from psychics and dream interpreters." He further suggests that Tiana has coached her daughter, claiming that Zara's selective mutism is a convenient condition that prevents cross-examination. Hayes demands psychological evaluations by neutral experts, rather than Dr. Wright, whom he dismisses as clearly biased toward her patient. Despite these objections, Judge Wilson approves a preliminary session to determine whether Zara can indeed communicate meaningful information through her interaction with Max. He orders strict protocols. The session will be recorded from multiple angles. Officer Parker will report Zara's statements verbatim, without interpretation, and representatives from both prosecution and defense will observe from an age and date adjoining room. What begins as a procedural experiment becomes a potential turning point in the case, one that hinges on the remarkable bond between a traumatized child and a dog trained to protect and serve, a bond that might finally give Zara the voice that fear and trauma have stolen from her. As the unconventional testimony approach gains tentative judicial approval, Tiana faces increasing hostility from the community that should be supporting her. Neighbors who once offered perfunctory waves now cross the street to avoid passing her house. The few who initially expressed sympathy after her assault withdraw their friendly overtures, suddenly too busy for previously arranged coffee meetings or playdates for their children with Zara. Anonymous notes appear in their mailbox with messages like, "Troublemakers aren't welcome here," and "Some people should know when to leave well enough alone." Their home is repeatedly vandalized, with eggs thrown at windows, garbage dumped on their lawn, and once, most disturbingly, a dead squirrel left on their front steps with a crude note reading, "You're next." Each incident is reported, photographed, and added to the growing file of harassment, though police response remains perfunctory at best. Officers arrive hours after being called, take minimal notes, and invariably conclude there's insufficient evidence to pursue an investigation. When security camera footage clearly shows teenagers from Richard's church youth group toilet papering their trees at night, the responding officer dismisses it as just kids playing pranks, despite the clear connection to their time Suraznex tormentor. Tiana's professional life deteriorates alongside her community standing. Her hours at the hospital are reduced to part-time until the situation resolves, effectively cutting her income by more than half, while her legal and security expenses mount. Colleagues who once invited her to lunch now avoid eye contact in hallways, their silence, a clear indication of which side they've chosen. Linda Caldwell makes her presence felt through strategic scheduling that assigns Tiana to the least desirable shifts and locations, often working alone in departments where she has limited experience. Human Resources ignores her formal complaints about this treatment, responding with vague references to departmental needs and appropriate staffing allocations based on seniority. The financial strain becomes nearly unbearable as legal fees accumulate and income dwindles, forcing Tiana to withdraw from her advanced degree program and cash out her modest retirement savings just to keep their home. Child Protective Services intensifies their scrutiny, conducting unannounced home visits and expressing ongoing concern about Zara's continued selective mutism. The same social worker who previously questioned Tiana's parenting now suggests that Zara's lack of verbal communication indicates possible neglect of developmental needs rather than trauma response. She recommends mandatory psychological evaluations by state-appointed specialists, bypassing Dr. Wright's ongoing treatment. We need objective assessment from professionals without a pre-existing relationship to the family, she explains, implying that Dr. Wright's supportive approach somehow compromises her professional judgment. During one particularly confrontational visit, the social worker notes Tiana's obvious exhaustion and financial strain as evidence of diminished capacity to provide adequate care rather than the natural consequence of fighting a system designed to break her. Each interaction carries the unspoken threat that Zara could be removed from her care, adding unbearable stress to an already traumatic situation. Against this backdrop of institutional hostility, Marcus works with Dr. Wright and Officer Parker to prepare Zara for her unusual court appearance. They create a specialized protocol for the sessions carefully designed to avoid any suggestion of coaching while establishing a communication channel through Max. During practice sessions in Dr. Wright's office, they discover that Zara responds best when the adults pretend to be busy with other tasks, giving her the illusion of privacy with Max. She sits beside the dog, stroking his fur while whispering into his ear, seemingly unbothered by Officer Parker's presence, as long as he maintains focus on training commands rather than her words. Through these indirect sessions, they learn disturbing details about multiple incidents Zara witnessed. Richard watching their house at night, his distinctive ring catching moonlight. As he jimmied their back door, his voice, when he purred, threatened her mother using racial slurs she repeats without understanding their meaning. Most significantly, she describes hiding in the car during the assault, seeing Richard's face contort with rage as he called her mother names, while striking her repeatedly. Her descriptions contain details no one could have coached. The specific pattern of Richard's watch, how his police academy ring left marks on her mother's arm, the exact words he used that don't appear in any official report. Each session is meticulously documented, with Parker transcribing Zara's whispered words exactly as spoken without adult interpretation or clarification. Dr. Wright monitors the child's emotional state throughout, ensuring the process itself doesn't create additional trauma. Officer Parker faces increasing hostility at work as his involvement becomes known within the department. His locker is vandalized with the word "traitor" spray-painted across it. His service weapon disappears during a shift change, only to reappear hours later after he reports it missing, suggesting a deliberate attempt to make him appear irresponsible. Anonymous calls come to his home phone at 3 a.m, nothing but breathing, or occasionally whispered threats about what happens to cops who don't back their brothers. His previously friendly relationship with his sergeant deteriorates into cold professionalism instructions delivered without eye contact. Performance reviews suddenly finding areas for improvement where only commendations existed before. Even Max is targeted. A neighborhood kid throws food over their fence that contains broken glass caught on camera, but quickly dismissed as a childish prank, despite the potentially fatal consequences for the dog. Throughout this escalating pressure campaign, Parker maintains his resolve, focusing on the integrity of the process and his growing conviction that Zara's testimony could expose not just one corrupt officer, but an entire system of comment, protection, and privilege that undermines the justice he swore to uphold. Richard's defense team, meanwhile, mounts an aggressive pre-trial strategy. They file multiple motions to exclude Zara's testimony, entirely arguing that a 3-year-old lacks sufficient cognitive development to provide reliable testimony and that the dog handler methodology has no scientific validity or established precedent in criminal proceedings. They demand extensive psychological evaluations of both Tiana and Zara, seeking to paint the mother as emotionally unstable and the daughter as developmentally delayed rather than traumatized. When these approaches fail to convince Judge Wilson, they shift tactics, leaking selected information to local media outlets that portray Tiana as an attention-seeking opportunist, using her daughter for financial gain through a gain-self potential civil suite. Opinion pieces appear questioning the dangerous precedent of allowing children's testimony through unproven methods, while social media campaigns orchestrated by police union supporters paint Richard as the victim of anti-police sentiment and politically motivated prosecution. Despite these pressures, Judge Wilson makes an unexpected ruling that shocks both prosecution and defense. After reviewing extensive case law and consulting with child psychology experts, he allows Zara's testimony with Max present, citing the unique circumstances and compelling evidence of trauma-induced communication barriers. His detailed written opinion acknowledges the unconventional nature of the approach, but emphasizes the court's fundamental obligation to find truth and deliver justice, particularly for the most vulnerable victims. When traditional methods fail those most in need of the court's protection, he writes, we must consider innovative approaches that serve the interests of justice while preserving the rights of all parties. His ruling establishes strict parameters. The testimony must occur in a modified setting with minimal intimidation factors. Officer Parker must report Zara's statements verbatim, without interpretation, and the defense will have opportunity for appropriate follow-up questions delivered through the same channel. The ruling sends shockwaves through the legal community, with some praising Wilson's courage and others condemning his judicial activism. For Tiana and Zara, it represents something far more personal, the first indication that someone with authority might actually listen to their truth, might value Zara's experience despite her age, race, and trauma-induced. Silence. Do you believe children should be allowed to testify in court cases involving their family members? Comment number 1. If you think children's testimony is essential in cases of domestic violence, even when it might be emotionally difficult for them. Comment number 2. If you believe children should be shielded from court proceedings, regardless of the circumstances. Have you ever witnessed a system meant to protect people actually cause more harm instead? Like this video, if you've seen institutions fail the very people they're supposed to serve. Subscribe for more stories about justice, resilience, and the courage to stand against powerful systems. Let me ask you this. What happens when one small voice challenges an entire system built to silence it? Let's find out as we continue Zara's remarkable journey toward justice. The trial opens on a crisp October morning under unusual circumstances. News vans line the courthouse steps, reporters clutching microphones and coffee cups as they deliver updates on what has become a nationally watched case. Court TV has requested permission to broadcast proceedings, citing significant public interest, though Judge Wilson denied this request to protect Zara's privacy. Security measures have been intensified with additional officers screening entrance and checking identification against an approved attendance list. The media frenzy focuses primarily on the unprecedented testimony method rather than the underlying allegations of assault and systematic discrimination, with legal commentators debating the potential impact on future cases involving traumatized witnesses. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere crackles with tension as opposing forces gather. Richard Caldwell appears in full-dress uniform, despite being technically suspended with pay, his posture military straight, his expression confident, bordering on smug. He's surrounded by supportive fellow officers filling 3 full rows of the gallery, their presence a silent but unmistakable message about police solidarity. Many wear small blue ribbons on their lapels, a symbol of support for their accused colleague that skirts the edge of appropriate courtroom behavior. By contrast, Tiana's side of the courtroom appears nearly empty, occupied only by Andrea Morgan, taking discreet notes, Dr. Wright reviewing clinical documents, and a small cluster of community activists who followed the case from the beginning. The disparity visually reinforces the power imbalance at the heart of the proceedings. institutional strength against individual vulnerability, established authority against marginalized voices seeking justice. Richard's attorney Benjamin Hayes cuts an imposing figure as he organizes documents at the defense table. A former prosecutor with 20 years of courtroom experience and strong connections throughout the law enforcement community, Hayes specializes in defending police officers accused of misconduct, boasting a nearly perfect acquittal record. His expensive suit, precisely knotted tie, and monogrammed cufflinks project success and confidence, a stark contrast to Marcus Thompson's more modest appearance at the prosecution table. Hayes's opening statement masterfully constructs an alternative narrative around the events, portraying Richard as a dedicated officer committed to maintaining community standards and protecting property values against elements that threaten neighborhood stability. Without explicitly mentioning race, he uses coded language that resonates with certain jurors, referring to cultural differences in understanding community norms and misinterpretations of legitimate law enforcement activity. He portrays Tiana as an angry woman making false accusations against a respected officer who was simply enforcing neighborhood regulations. Sergeant Caldwell has served this community with distinction for over 20 years, Hayes tells the jury, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. His exemplary record speaks for itself. Commendations for bravery, perfect attendance, not a single sustained complaint until this unfortunate misunderstanding. He suggests that Tiana resented legitimate police attention and fabricated claims of racial bias to deflect from her own rule violations. The evidence will show that Ms. Johnson repeatedly ignored homeowners association guidelines, reacted with hostility to reasonable enforcement efforts, and has a history of conflating routine interactions with supposed discrimination. Hayes introduces character witnesses who praise Richard's community service while subtly suggesting Tiana doesn't fit the neighborhood profile. A homeowners association board member testifies about Richard's commitment to maintaining standards while carefully avoiding direct references to the Johnsons. A fellow church member describes Richard's volunteer work with youth groups and his generosity during holiday toy drives. A neighbor recounts how Richard helped install security lights throughout the block to keep everyone safe, the implication being that safety requires vigilance against certain undesirable elements. Each witness constructs another piece of the narrative, portraying Richard as the community's protector rather than Tiana's tormentor. Marcus Thompson's opening argument presents a starkly different picture, methodically establishing the pattern of harassment, intimidation, and ultimately violence that characterized Richard's interactions with the Johnsons. Using a simple timeline display, he tracks the escalation from petty complaints to physical assault, connecting each incident to documented evidence. Unlike Hayes's emotional appeals, Marcus relies heavily on facts, dates, times photographs of injuries, medical reports, and the disturbing pattern of police non-response to legitimate complaints. This case is not about homeowners association guidelines or neighborhood standards, he tells the jury firmly. It's about abuse of power, systematic discrimination, and the physical assault of a mother in front of her 3-year-old child. Marcus struggles against the overwhelming blue wall of solidarity in the gallery, aware that every juror can see the display of force supporting the defendant. Despite this challenge, he methodically presents evidence of Richard's history of complaints from other minority residents that were buried by internal affairs. Computer records show 17 formal complaints filed against Richard over 15 years, all by residents of color, all dismissed without full investigation. Former residents testify about similar patterns of harassment, though many decline to appear, citing fear of police retaliation. When Officer Parker testifies about department practices of dismissing complaints from certain neighborhoods, the gallery of officers stares him down with unblinking hostility. Parker describes how complaint forms from minority residents were often lost or downgraded to informal inquiries that required no official response. He explains the unofficial practice of extra attention given to residents who don't match the neighborhood profile, a euphemism for racial minorities living in predominantly white areas. During Parker's testimony, the police chief sits prominently in the first row directly behind Richard, taking conspicuous notes whenever officers testify, a silent reminder of potential consequences for breaking ranks. Under Hayes's aggressive cross-examination, Parker remains steady, neither embellishing nor minimizing his observations of departmental bias. When Hayes attempts to portray him as a disgruntled employee with performance issues, Parker calmly refers to his personnel file, showing consistent commendations until his involvement in this case. "My commitment is to the oath I took to serve and protect all citizens equally," Parker states, looking directly at the jury rather than at his glaring colleagues. That oath doesn't come with exceptions based on race, income, or address. As technical testimony about police procedures and evidence handling continues, Judge Wilson appears increasingly troubled by evidence of systematic cover-ups, but maintains strict courtroom neutrality. He sustains objections from both sides, equally enforcing procedural rules with consistent precision, regardless of which attorney raises the issue. His questions to witnesses focus on clarifying factual discrepancies rather than exploring emotional content, his expression revealing nothing of his personal assessment of testimony. The battle lines are clearly drawn: institutional power against individual courage, to establish systems against demands for accountability, the comfortable status quo against uncomfortable truth. As the first week of testimony concludes, media coverage intensifies with legal analysts debating the strength of each side's case, while social commentators frame the trial within broader contexts of police accountability and racial justice. Community tensions rise alongside public interest, with small demonstrations forming outside the courthouse each morning. Some supporting Richard with "Back the Blue" signs, others demanding justice for Tiana with placards reading "Who polices?" The police through it all. Zara remains secluded at home with rotating caregivers, protected from media attention and carefully prepared for her upcoming appearance, an appearance that both sides recognize could fundamentally alter the course of the proceedings for better or worse. The pivotal day arrives with heightened security and palpable tension throughout the courthouse. Based on Judge Wilson's detailed order, the courtroom has been significantly modified to create a less intimidating environment for Zara's testimony. The traditional witness stand has been replaced by a comfortable seating area with child-sized furniture in a small alcove partially screened from the main court. The judge's bench has been lowered to fence and prosecution tables repositioned to appear less confrontational, and the gallery seating rearranged to minimize the audience's visual impact. Most significantly, Zara Max and Officer Parker will be positioned in this separate area, connected to the main courtroom by audio and video links that allow all parties to observe while maintaining a protective barrier for the child. These preparations, unprecedented in the court's history, become the subject of last-minute objections from Richard's attorney. Hayes argues vehemently that these modifications unduly prejudice the jury by suggesting the defendant is so threatening that extraordinary measures are required. Judge Wilson dismisses these objections with uncharacteristic firmness, stating that the court's primary obligation to a 3-year-old witness supersedes conventional procedural concerns. Hayes continues, creating a hostile atmosphere, objecting to Officer Parker's presence as potentially biasing the child's communication, demanding that a defense-selected handler work with Max instead, and questioning Dr. Wright's qualifications to assess Zara's emotional state during testimony. Each objection is systematically overruled, though the delay tactics successfully postpone Zara's appearance until after the lunch recess, extending the already stressful situation for both child and mother. When Zara finally enters through a side door holding tightly to Tiana's hand, the courtroom falls into hushed silence. Despite careful preparation, the little girl appears visibly terrified by the unfamiliar setting and faces watching her. She wears a simple blue dress with matching ribbons in her carefully braided hair, looking even younger than her 3 years, as she shrinks against her mother's leg thumb creeping toward her mouth despite obvious coaching to appear grown up for the important occasion. Tiana kneels beside her daughter, whispering reassurance before reluctantly joining Dr. Wright in the designated observation area, leaving Zara standing alone in the modified testimony space. The child's eyes dart frantically around the room, her small chest rising and falling with rapid breaths that concern Dr. Wright enough to signal the judge about potential distress. Before Judge Wilson can address the situation, Officer Parker enters with Max on a loose lead, and the atmosphere transforms instantly. Zara's attention locks onto the dog, her fearful expression softening with recognition. Max, specially groomed for court and wearing his official K9 unit harness, maintains perfect discipline despite clearly recognizing the child. With Officer Parker's quiet permission, Zara approaches the dog, arms reaching out in silent request. She runs to Max, wrapping her small arms around his neck in a desperate hug that speaks volumes about her need for safety in this intimidating environment. The Belgian Malinois, despite his intensive protection training, responds with gentle patience, standing perfectly still as the child clings to him. Judge Wilson allows this moment of connection before gently reminding everyone of the procedure they've established. Officer Parker positions himself and Max at the child-sized table, keeping his movements slow and predictable. Following their practice protocol, he engages Max with simple training exercises while appearing to pay minimal attention to Zara, creating the illusion of privacy that has proven most effective during their preparation sessions. The court watches in tense silence as Zara gradually settles beside Max, her small hand stroking his fur in rhythmic motions that visibly calm her. For several minutes, nothing happens beyond this quiet interaction, the child seemingly oblivious to the dozens of eyes watching her every move. Hayes begins to shift impatiently, exchanging meaningful glances with Richard that suggest this entire exercise is proving their point about its ineffectiveness. Then, so quietly that the audio system barely captures it, Zara begins whispering to Max while continuing to stroke his neck and ears. She leans close to the dog's head, her lips almost touching his fur as she shares secrets meant only for him. Officer Parker, following protocol, maintains his focus on routine commands for Max while listening carefully to Zara's whispered words. His expression changes subtly from professional neutrality to controlled shock as the content of her communication becomes clear. Richard, watching this interaction from the defense table, suddenly stands with unexpected violence, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," he shouts, his face flushing dark red with anger. This charade has gone on long enough. The outburst startles Zara into silence, her small body freezing in fear as she recognizes the voice that has populated her nightmares. Judge Wilson's gavel cracks sharply as he orders Richard to sit down immediately, his typically measured judicial tone replaced with unmistakable authority. "You will control yourself in my courtroom, Sergeant Caldwell, or you will be removed." That is not a warning, but a promise. Security officers move closer to Richard as Hayes attempts to calm his client, whispering urgently while gripping his arm. The momentary chaos settles into tense silence as all attention returns to the testimony area where Zara has pressed herself against Max, visibly trembling. "Doctor," Wright signals concern about continuing, but after a brief conference with the judge, Officer Parker gently encourages Zara to keep talking to Max if she wishes. With remarkable resilience, the child gradually resumes her whispered communication, though she positions herself on the side of the dog furthest from Richard's view. Following established procedure, Parker begins reporting what Zara is sharing detailed accounts of multiple incidents she witnessed from hiding places in her home, including specific threats Richard made to her mother using phrases like, "People like you don't belong here, and this neighborhood has standards." She describes precise details of Richard's uniform accessories and personal items that only someone who had seen him up close could know. The distinctive scratch on his badge, the pattern of his watch band, the unusual shape of his academy ring that left marks on her mother's arm. Most damning, Zara describes seeing Richard plant something in their basement during the break-in, carefully removing it from his pocket while wearing gloves, and placing it behind the water heater, which explains why responding officers later found a small bag of marijuana during their cursory investigation. With childlike innocence, she recounts hearing Richard talking on his phone during the break-in, telling someone that he took care of the problem and they won't have to worry about property values dropping anymore. Through Parker's careful verbatim reporting, Zara's testimony creates a comprehensive picture of premeditated harassment escalating to violence, all motivated by racial animus and property concerns, rather than any legitimate law. Enforcement purpose. The details she provides match evidence already presented, but add crucial context and connection that transforms isolated incidents into a coherent pattern of targeted discrimination. As Parker continues relaying Zara's account of the assault, she witnessed Richard's composure finally shatters completely. He lunges toward the testimony area, shouting, "You little liar, you didn't see anything." Security officers intercept him before he can take 3 steps, but his explosive reaction and the racial slurs that follow his outburst confirm Zara's fear of him in the most visceral way possible. The child screams and dives under the table, as Max immediately positions his body protectively between her and the perceived threat his training activating as he issues a warning growl toward Richard. Judge Wilson immediately orders Richard taken into custody for contempt of court and clears the courtroom of all spectators, allowing only essential personnel to remain. In the chaotic aftermath, Tiana rushes to comfort her terrified daughter, cradling her beneath the table, while Dr. Wright assesses her emotional state. Max maintains his protective position, responding only to Parker's quietest commands, while keeping watchful eyes on the door through which Richard was removed. When relative calm returns, Judge Wilson calls both attorneys to his bench for an extended conference, their hushed but intense conversation occasionally rising enough for terms like witness intimidation and additional charges to reach the Prate gallery. After nearly 30 minutes, Wilson announces that court will adjourn until the following morning, when he will issue several significant rulings based on the day's events. As security escorts Tiana and Zara through private corridors to avoid the media scrum outside, the little girl maintains her grip on Max's fur until the last possible moment. Just before they separate, she whispers something additional to the dog that makes Officer Parker's eyes widen slightly. When Tiana asks what her daughter said, Parker reports that Zara thanked Max for helping the truth come out when nobody believed us. In that simple statement lies the heart of what has transpired. A child's pure understanding that sometimes truth requires extraordinary measures to overcome the barriers of power, prejudice, and institutional protection that would otherwise bury it forever. In the aftermath of Zara's powerful testimony and Richard's damning courtroom outburst, the case transforms dramatically from a simple assault trial into a comprehensive investigation of systematic discrimination within the police department. Judge Wilson convenes a special hearing the following morning without the jury present, where he delivers a series of rulings that reshape the proceedings entirely. Richard is charged with additional counts of witness intimidation, evidence tampering, breaking and entering, and civil rights violations based on the new evidence revealed through Zara's testimony. His bail is revoked due to the demonstrated threat to witnesses and the integrity of the judicial process, sending him to county detention to await the remainder of the trial. Most significantly, Wilson grants the prosecution's motion to expand the scope of evidence to include departmental records of all complaints filed against officers by minority residents over the past decade, effectively putting the prosecution's entire system on trial alongside Richard. The final week of testimony reveals the true extent of institutional failure. Internal affairs documents obtained through judicial subpoena, despite fierce departmental resistance, show dozens of legitimate complaints systematically downgraded, dismissed without investigation, or buried in administrative limbo. Text messages between Richard and other officers expose casual racism disguised as community protection and maintaining neighborhood standards. Most damning are recordings from Richard's own dashboard camera that he failed to properly delete, capturing conversations with fellow officers about coordinated harassment of undesirable residents who bring down property values. The jury deliberates for just 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts, including felony assault, breaking and entering evidence, tampering, witness intimidation, and civil rights violations. At sentencing, Judge Wilson departs from guidelines to impose maximum consecutive terms, resulting in a 15-year sentence. His unusually passionate statement from the bench cites the extraordinary breach of public trust and systematic abuse of authority against those most vulnerable to such abuse. Beyond the individual case, Wilson orders an independent investigation into the police department conducted by the State Attorney General's office with federal oversight. The resulting probe uncovers patterns of discriminatory enforcement evidence, suppression, and retaliatory practices against minority residents who filed complaints. Several officers face charges for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering, while others receive administrative sanctions for failing to report misconduct. The police chief, facing imminent indictment for his role in covering up complaints, resigns in disgrace, issuing a statement blaming a few bad apples rather than acknowledging the systemic nature of the problem. Andrea Morgan's investigative series documenting the Johnson case and subsequent departmental investigation wins a National Journalism Award and prompts federal oversight of the department under a consent decree requiring comprehensive reforms in training, complaint procedures, and community engagement. The series, titled Blue Wall Black Lives, becomes required reading in police academies nationwide as an example of how unchecked power corrupts even well-intentioned institutions. Officer Parker faces significant professional consequences in the immediate aftermath of his testimony. His locker is vandalized, colleagues refuse to provide backup on calls, and anonymous threats appear under his windshield wipers. For 3 months, he works in virtual isolation, partnered only with Max, and assigned to remote areas where interaction with other officers is minimal. The institutional retaliation ends only after several officers involved in the harassment face disciplinary action under the new oversight regime. Eventually, Parker's courage becomes recognized as the department undergoes painful but necessary reform. When a new police chief is appointed from outside the department with a mandate for cultural transformation, Parker is promoted to lead a newly formed community relations unit focused on rebuilding trust in minority neighborhoods. Under his guidance, officers receive enhanced training in implicit bias recognition, de-escalation techniques, and cultural competency. The unit establishes regular forums where residents can voice concerns directly to department leadership without fear of retaliation, creating accountability mechanisms that finally give marginalized communities a meaningful voice in how they are policed. Tiana's journey from victim to advocate unfolds gradually as she recovers from both physical and emotional trauma. Initially reluctant to step into the public spotlight, she finds her voice after being approached by other families who experienced similar discrimination but lacked the resources or courage to challenge the system. With support from a civil rights organization, she establishes the Johnson Justice Initiative, providing advocacy, legal assistance, and emotional support for victims of institutional discrimination. The substantial settlement from her civil lawsuit against the police department funds the initiative's work while allowing her to complete her advanced nursing degree. She eventually accepts a position as consultant to the district attorney's office, where she works with Marcus Thompson to develop trauma-informed protocols for interviewing vulnerable witnesses, using her family's experience to create more humane investigative procedures. Most importantly, Zara begins speaking again, not just to Max, but gradually to her mother, and eventually to a widening circle of trusted adults. Her recovery isn't linear. Nightmares persist, loud noises still trigger fear responses, and she remains wary of uniformed officers except for Parker. But with consistent therapy and unwavering support, she slowly reclaims her voice and confidence. The bond between Zara and Max proves so significant to her healing process that Officer Parker arranges regular visits, eventually establishing a formal therapy dog program for child victims of trauma throughout the county. On the 1-year anniversary of the trial, the mayor's office hosts a special ceremony recognizing individuals who contributed to the transformation of community justice. Zara, now 4 years old and considerably more verbal, receives a child-sized plaque and a small badge, making her an honorary K-9 officer in recognition of her courage. As she accepts the honor, She clearly speaks a complete sentence to the audience, without whispering, "Max helped me be brave," when no one listened. The new police chief, Dr. Elaine Washington, a woman of color with a background in both law enforcement and psychology, kneels to Zara's level and makes a public promise that becomes the department's new motto: "We are listening now, and we won't stop." Against significant community pressure, Tiana and Zara remain in their Oakwood Heights home, refusing to be driven out by lingering hostility from certain neighbors. Over time, the neighborhood dynamics shift as new families move in, attracted by decreasing property values that ironically resulted from the publicity surrounding Richard's case. The once homogeneous community gradually diversifies, creating opportunities for meaningful integration rather than tokenism. Former neighbors who shunned the Johnsons during the trial gradually reconnect, some offering genuine apologies for their silence, others simply resuming normal interactions without acknowledging past failures. A few diehard supporters of Richard continue their cold hostility, but their influence diminishes as community standards evolve to value inclusion rather than exclusion. On warm evenings, Tiana often sits on their front porch, watching Zara play in the yard that once felt like contested territory. The little girl who once hid under her bed, whispering to stuffed animals, now organizes elaborate games with neighborhood children of various backgrounds, her voice clear and confident as she assigns roles and establishes rules. Sometimes, Officer Parker brings Max for visits, and the sight of the child and dog together, her small brown hand resting comfortably on his powerful shoulder, becomes a powerful symbol of the unusual alliance that ultimately brought healing not just to one family but to an entire system. The story of a 3-year-old who spoke truth to power through her connection with a police dog becomes more than a courtroom curiosity. It evolves into a case study taught in law schools about innovative approaches to justice, a reminder that sometimes truth comes from the most unexpected sources and through the most unconventional channels. For those willing to listen, Zara's whispered testimony continues to echo through reformed institutions and transformed communities, proof that even the smallest voice can create profound change when it speaks authentic truth regardless of who is prepared to hear it. What would you do if you witnessed injustice in your community? Would you have the courage to stand up like Tiana and Zara did, even when the system itself seems aligned against you? Leave a comment below, sharing a time when you stood up for what was right despite the consequences. If this story moved you, please hit that like button to help others find it too. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that justice is possible even when it seems most distant. Thank you for joining us on this journey through darkness into light, and remember, sometimes the quietest voices carry the most powerful truths. This powerful story reminds us that justice often requires extraordinary courage from ordinary people. When systems designed to protect us instead perpetuate discrimination, the path to accountability becomes steeper and more dangerous. Tiana and Zara's journey illustrates how racism operates not just through individual actions, but through institutional structures that dismiss, minimize, and retaliate against those who challenge the status quo. Their experience teaches us that healing from trauma isn't linear. It requires safety, consistency, and sometimes unconventional approaches that honor a survivor's unique needs. We see how a child's perspective can cut through complexity to reveal simple truths about right and wrong. Zara's connection with Max demonstrates how animals can create safe spaces for communication when human interactions feel threatening. Their bond reminds us that sometimes we need bridges between trauma and healing, between silence and speech. Most importantly, this story shows us that change is possible even within deeply flawed systems. It takes courage from individuals willing to risk everything, allies who use their privilege to amplify marginalized voices, and leaders brave enough to acknowledge institutional failures. True justice requires not just punishing individual wrongdoers, but transforming the systems that enabled them. When we truly listen to even the smallest voices, especially those society has tried to silence, we open the door to healing not just for individuals, but for entire communities. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wondered if speaking up would make any difference? Or have you experienced a situation where your voice wasn't heard because of who you are? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might give someone else the courage they need today. If this story moved you, please hit that like button to help others find it. The algorithm notices when viewers engage, and more people need to hear these important messages about justice and courage. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that explore the human capacity for resilience in the face of injustice. We'd especially appreciate if you'd share this video with someone who works in law enforcement, education, or child advocacy. Sometimes the most important changes happen when stories reach people in positions to create systemic.com change. Thank you for bearing witness to Zara and Tiana's journey. In a world that often tries to silence certain voices, your willingness to listen and learn makes more difference than you know. Remember, justice begins with the courage to speak truth, even when no one seems prepared to hear it.